Chapter 112 to 114. Merlin defeated Shirou in less than a year. The map showed only the island of Britain, which left Shirou with very little strategic depth. He struggled to familiarize himself with the terrain, while Merlin led his troops with great momentum and killed him without giving Shirou any chance to develop. Merlin truly lived up to his name as a wise man, with top-notch military strategy and tactics. The most critical factor in Shirou's defeat was that the enemy was too familiar with the British terrain. Shirou was defeated before he had even studied the terrain well. After defeating Shirou, Merlin turned to Artoria with a smug grin and quipped, "See that? The kid talks a big game, but he's not as great as he thinks he is." Shirou, now tied up by Merlin's soldiers and feeling like a prisoner, responded, "You're just taking advantage of my unfamiliarity with the terrain and my lack of military strategist." Merlin arched an eyebrow in disbelief. "So you're saying that if you knew the terrain and had a competent general leading your troops, you could have defeated me?" "I never said that," he responded defensively, "but at least I wouldn't have lost so easily." Merlin raised an eyebrow and declared, "All right, I'll make you admit defeat." He waved his staff and pulled Kay into the dream realm. After explaining why he had been summoned, Kay looked confused and frustrated. "What does this have to do with me? You guys can play without me. I don't care," he grumbled. Kay had been immersed in a dream where he was helping his adopted sister restore peace to Britain, receiving the title of Lord and searching for a lady of the manor. However, Merlin's sudden intervention rudely cut the dream short. "Don't accuse me of bullying you," Merlin retorted. "This time it'll be a fair 2 versus 2. Artoria will be the queen on my side, and I'll assist her. You'll be the king on your side, and Kay will assist you." Kay's anxiety skyrocketed at the thought of facing Artoria and Merlin together. Hey, are you kidding me? If Artoria is on your side, it's already an unfair match. We'll definitely lose. Guinevere may be able to do math, but he's not a knight." "Don't worry, let's just play for fun," Shirou reassured Kay as he patted his shoulder. Kay wore a helpless expression as he confessed, "I should probably say this up front. I don't know much about strategy, and I'm no match for Artoria in combat." Shirou nodded in understanding. "We just need to hold the front line and minimize losses. We'll find a way to turn the tables." Suddenly, a soldier burst into the room, breathless with urgency. "Your Majesty, there's a golden-haired madman shouting in front of our army." Kay's hand instinctively went to his sword. "I'll go defend our troops." "Go ahead," Shirou replied. As Kay departed, he pondered his next move. In truth, he was new to the experience of being a king in this game. The only other time he had held a position of power and leadership was during the Holy Grail War in the city of Sin, when he had been consumed by all the world's evil. Now, the situation was far greater than a mere city. The kingdom he ruled spanned half of Britain, leaving Shirou feeling overwhelmed. What could he do? What was within his capabilities? Create bombs, nuclear weapons, tanks. He quickly dismissed these thoughts, realizing he didn't even remember the recipe for gunpowder from before he crossed over. Drawing on his past experiences and historical knowledge, Shirou knew he needed to start by establishing laws. He set up a large wooden post in the market and offered a reward of 10,000 semis to anyone who could move it to the city gate. To add drama and tension, he hired a dozen actors to blend into the crowd. Some acted as antagonists, sowing distrust among the people, while others acted as cheerleaders, building support for the cause. As the atmosphere heated up, the crowd became uncertain between belief and disbelief. Finally, the actors successfully moved the post to the city gate, earning the reward and the people's cheers and trust. However, Shirou recognized that there were significant differences between the simulated kingdom in Merlin's dream world and reality. For instance, in reality, there were many complex aristocratic forces at play, but here it was just a facade. While the laws he established did affect interests, there was no opposition from any powerful forces, making it feel artificial and like NPC. Compared to the city of sin created by all the world's evil, which had gangs causing trouble, the simulated kingdom was much simpler. However, the lack of aristocratic forces made it easier to implement the law smoothly. With the law in place, Shirou pondered what else he could do to govern the country. However, he quickly realized that he had no experience in this area. He sighed in frustration. I don't know anything about this. I can only do some farming. Without the knowledge of gunpowder or the ability to create weapons, Shirou was left with only farming as a viable option. However, when he saw the Britons using forks, axes, and even their bare hands to till the soil, he was at a loss. He couldn't understand how such methods could be efficient at all. Without hesitation, Shirou applied his knowledge of farming to the situation at hand. He utilized all the farming tools he knew of, including plows with multiple types of hitching systems and various tilling methods such as burning and earth blending. Though he couldn't remember the recipe for gunpowder or other advanced technologies, he was confident in his farming expertise. After all, farming had been an essential part of life for at least 3 generations in his homeland. Even with the advent of urban living, farming methods and tools continued to be taught in history classes. In high school, detailed lessons on sowing methods were provided, and in geography classes, students learned methods for discerning climate and soil fertility. This was a vital part of cultural traditions that Shirou had inherited and one that he had even studied intensely for his college entrance exam. It was hard to imagine how he could forget such valuable knowledge now. Thanks to the implementation of these effective farming methods and tools, which had been tested and refined over time, Shirou's grain production increased almost exponentially. His grain silos were overflowing with abundance. However, Shirou couldn't help but feel that Merlin's kingdom simulation was severely lacking. There were no events like droughts, locust plagues, or soil salinization to add to the challenge. He sighed. Why isn't there any difficulty at all? Without these challenges, it's too easy. While grain production had explosively increased, the situation on the front lines remained dire. As Kay had previously warned, he was no match for Artoria in terms of personal combat or strategy. Every battle seemed destined for defeat. With no other option, Shirou and his army resorted to a defensive strategy and fought a war of attrition. Despite being outmatched by Artoria's forces, Shirou's military strategy had improved, and he managed to hold his ground. As winter approached, both sides ran out of food and had to return home to prepare for the next harvest. This was a common feature of warfare during this era, where low agricultural productivity often led to food shortages, forcing soldiers to return home to farm and hunt. Shirou proudly pointed to the 19 nearly overflowing grain silos and told Kay, "We have enough food to go around. You can fight with ease." Kay was left speechless at the sight of the seemingly endless supply of grain, pouring out like a waterfall. He had never seen so much food in one place before. As soon as Kay returned to the front lines with 2 warehouses full of grain, Artoria's side was still out hunting and stockpiling food. However, with the abundant food supply, Shirou's side gained a significant advantage. They could fight longer and hold out until the enemy was weakened by hunger. The prospect of running out of food was no longer a concern. Kay joined the battle, and together with Shirou, they successfully defended their territory. The war dragged on for a long time, with both sides trying to gain the upper hand. But in the end, Shirou and Kay emerged victorious. Looking back, Shirou's knowledge of farming and his ability to increase the food supply was instrumental in their victory. Without it, they would have lost the war long ago. Kay's forces split into 3, ruthlessly raiding villages and disrupting the enemy's resource production. Upon hearing the news, Artoria was taken aback and puzzled as to why the enemy persisted in fighting despite their lack of resources. Nevertheless, she quickly rallied her troops to counterattack and emerged victorious in every skirmish. It must be noted that Merlin's education had been a resounding success. In matters of military strategy, Artoria proved herself to be exceptionally skilled, and Kay was no match for her. For 2 years, Kay was compelled to gradually withdraw his defensive line and assume a strictly defensive stance. Although Artoria's forces maintained the upper hand and demonstrated their martial prowess, Merlin was surprised to find that despite their victories, their morale remained low, while the enemy's morale was alarmingly high. What's more, each time Artoria's troops halted to rest and recover, the enemy would launch frenzied attacks upon them, as though they were rabid dogs. Merlin couldn't help but wonder what was happening. Could this even be possible? Weren't they afraid of depleting their food reserves? It was clear that Arotria's forces had been squeezing the nearby villages so much that they were on the brink of rebellion. But what about the other side? Intrigued by this mystery, Merlin used his special privileges to spy on their enemy. He nearly got a heart attack. On his side, they were so impoverished that they had to divide a single grain of rice into 10 portions, while on the other side, 30 granaries were overflowing with supplies. And to his astonishment, they were even constructing another granary. What in the world was going on here? Had they used Magecraft to manipulate the dream world? But after conducting a thorough investigation, Merlin was stunned to find no evidence of such tampering. If not through Magecraft, where could they possibly obtain so much food? Did it just fall from the sky? Merlin was dumbfounded and disoriented, and in the midst of his confusion, Kay and his forces launched another attack. Desperate and with no other viable options, Artoria was forced to resort to squeezing the villages once more in order to secure the necessary military provisions. "Please bear with us a little longer. We'll make it up to you once the war is over," Artoria said. However, to her dismay, there were few responses, and every villager appeared pallid and gaunt. They had been squeezed by both Merlin and Artoria for 2 long years, leaving them with not a single grain of rice in their homes. In stark contrast, Shirou's situation was vastly different. When he accompanied the tax collector to collect food from the nearby villages, the villagers greeted him with enthusiastic cheers, referring to him as their king. Overwhelmed by the villagers' enthusiasm, Shirou spoke out, "My dear subjects, a bright future awaits us all. Can you see it? Our wicked enemy is already beginning to falter, but our triumph is not mine alone. It belongs to each and every one of us. Our war is not a quest for conquest, but a fight for our beautiful homeland and a better future for ourselves." The villagers cheered, their faces lit up with hope and love. Shirou continued, "Therefore, I have decided to reduce taxes in half this year, and for families with soldiers, there will be a further 20% reduction in taxes." The crowd erupted in a frenzy of excitement, clapping and cheering, grateful for their ruler's generosity. This war is not one of conquest, but rather a battle for our own bright future. These words struck a deep chord within the hearts of the people. Moreover, the 50% tax reduction proved to be a practical benefit for the villagers, which further strengthened their loyalty towards Shirou. The vision of a brighter future, coupled with tangible benefits that served their interests, drove the people to cheer out loud. "King Shirou! King Shirou!" The cheers continued endlessly, echoing throughout the villages and beyond. It was a testament to the faith and trust that the people had placed in Shirou. The kingdom's simulation persisted for 5 long years. In the first 2 years, Merlin and Artoria managed to keep Shirou and Kay on the back foot, leaving them constantly out of breath. However, thanks to Kay's unwavering defense and Shirou's diligent efforts in farming, the concern of food shortage was eventually eliminated. And with that, Kay was able to turn the tide and begin harassing Merlin and Artoria during their production season. Despite being unable to win, Kay's forces continued to harass and disrupt the enemy's production efforts. As a result, Artoria's kingdom eventually became impoverished, and the people began to suffer. Driven to desperation, they rose up in rebellion against their own ruler. Determined to restore order, Artoria led her troops to quell the rebellion while simultaneously launching an attack on Kay. Thanks to their superior military strategy and the formidable dragon factor, they had never lost a battle. But despite their unparalleled track record, victory proved elusive in the end. They had been on the verge of victory, but then, suddenly, it all slipped away from them. Overwhelmed, exhausted, and famished, Artoria's forces were eventually overpowered by the rebel, and they were ultimately presented to Shirou as a token of surrender. As Shirou made his grand entrance amidst the resounding cheers of the people, Artoria's expression became one of complete shock. It was as if she had been defeated by society itself. This unexpected turn of events had utterly shattered her worldview, far exceeding anything she could have ever imagined. Merlin was also tied up by the rebel and mercilessly hung by Kay for his amusement. Merlin looked at Shirou and couldn't help but ask, "How did I lose?" Merlin was baffled by the outcome. Despite observing the world with his own eyes, he couldn't comprehend why he had lost. He had never lost a battle before, and yet, this time, he did. He had been winning the fight, and then suddenly, he lost. Shirou's victory seemed to defy the conventional laws of warfare, as he had somehow managed to emerge victorious despite being outmatched on the battlefield. This left Merlin even more puzzled and bewildered. In response to his confusion, Shirou simply shrugged and replied with a note of innocence, "I don't know either. All I know is farming." "I won't accept this. Let's play another round." Merlin gritted his teeth and his eyes burned with a rare flame of determination, and he started the game again. However, Merlin and Artoria found themselves defeated even more swiftly than before. The reason for their failure was that Kay had become familiar with their strategy. He would simply bide his time, defend against their attacks, and wait for Shirou to begin farming before launching a relentless campaign of harassment on their production efforts. This snowball effect continued to grow in strength, and in less than 4 years, Merlin's kingdom was ultimately defeated. Merlin tried to play a few more games, but in the last game, he finally broke down. Instead of waiting for the people of Merlin's kingdom to rebel, Shirou took the initiative. As the villagers teetered on the brink of oppression, he issued a decree proclaiming, "Those who surrender shall be treated as citizens, exempt from taxes for 2 years, and granted 10 bags of rice." And then? There was no "and then." Merlin simply broke down. Shirou had gained control over the starving populace, who had surrendered with their entire families. Merlin and Artoria, the only ones left in the palace, sat amidst the chaos. They were soon surrounded by Shirou and Kay's troops, who had arrived in force. In reality, it was nearly time to force them to commit suicide, as the game had ended. Merlin, with his mentality shattered, had accepted defeat and stopped playing. Even a phantom in the shape of a lump of sweet potato appeared in his mouth, a testament to his overwhelming despair. I actually lost so miserably," he muttered to himself. Artoria also broke down, holding her head and trembling in the corner. Kay felt a twinge of guilt and called out to Merlin in a small voice. "Great sage," Merlin muttered to himself and let out a bitter laugh. "Great sage, ha ha ha. Where's the great sage? I'm just Merlin, a useless Merlin." The phantom lump in the shape of a sweet potato in his mouth seemed to grow even larger as he spoke. "Are you okay?" Shirou asked as he walked over. "I'm just a small, useless Merlin," Merlin repeated with a defeated expression. "Don't be so discouraged," Shirou reassured him. "I wasn't the one who defeated you." Merlin turned to look at Shirou, his eyes blankly asking, "Then who was it?" "It was humanity," he replied with a smile. "Humanity?" Merlin asked with a hint of confusion. "Yes, it was humanity that defeated you, not me." "Humanity, humanity," Merlin repeated to himself, lost in thought. Shirou chuckled and continued, "No matter how powerful an individual is, they cannot surpass the power of a group. And no matter how intelligent an individual is, they cannot be smarter than a group. So don't underestimate yourself, Merlin. It was not me, but humanity who defeated you." Merlin raised his head and looked at Shirou. He saw a bright smile and a pair of fiery eyes. "I see. No wonder you're a vessel," Merlin thought to himself. Old Knight Ector looked bewildered as he stared at Kay, who had a serious expression on his face. "What did you say? Merlin pulled you into a dream to simulate a kingdom, but you and Guinevere easily defeated him?" Ector had been sound asleep when Kay abruptly woke him up. Initially, he had been quite angry, but after hearing Kay's story, his anger gave way to confusion. "I can't believe it," was written all over his weathered face. "Kay, have I ever taught you to lie?" Ector couldn't help but ask. He was utterly flabbergasted. Even though it was only a fantastical game conjured up by Merlin, and it felt so far removed from reality. Yet the fact remained that Merlin and Artoria, working in tandem, had been defeated by Kay and the boy they had taken in just a year ago. He wondered if what Kay had told him was even possible. As Artoria's mentor, Ector was keenly aware of just how formidable the 15-year-old had become. When it came to swordsmanship, she was every bit his equal, and even managed to surpass him, a once-renowned knight. Moreover, thanks to the dragon factor, Artoria's body possessed an endless source of strength. Even during his prime, Ector wouldn't dare to assert that he could defeat Artoria in combat at this very moment. As for Kay, Ector was also keenly aware of Kay's strengths and weaknesses. While Kay was every bit Artoria's equal in terms of swordsmanship, without the dragon factor, he couldn't match her strength, agility, and other physical abilities. As for military strategy, Merlin was a wise man whose eyes had seen much of the world. It seems unlikely that he would take on a student who was lacking in military strategy. However, Kay claimed that he not only defeated Artoria, but also outwitted Merlin and trapped them both in a prison. This seemed highly improbable. The notion that the ideal vessel for the king, accompanied by the wise Merlin, could be defeated by his own son and a seemingly ordinary boy of unknown origin was difficult to believe. "I'm not lying, Father. I know it's hard to believe, which is why I came to report it to you," Kay said. In truth, Kay was grappling with doubts about the situation himself. It all seemed too fantastical. Could it be that, with Shirou's aid, he truly had overcome Merlin and Artoria and united Britain? Was the ambition Kay held in his heart actually realized in a dream? It all felt so surreal, almost as if it couldn't possibly be real. Kay found himself questioning how they could possibly gather so much food in the dream realm. Despite his doubts, Ector approached Artoria to inquire about the truth of the matter after she had woken up from the dream. Before he could even speak, however, he saw the devastated expression on her small face and the hollow, self-doubting look in her eyes. Ector knew that it was real, and there was no need to doubt it. He understood Artoria's temperament all too well. Short of being utterly defeated and crushed, there was no way that Artoria, who was always so serious and strong, would doubt her very existence to such an extent. With a resolute voice, Ector made a decision. "Artoria, your lessons in swordsmanship and horsemanship are on hold for now. You must go and recruit Guinevere as your knight. This is the only task you must accomplish." "Ah." Artoria looked up at Ector with vacant eyes, still struggling to recover from the beating she had received at the hands of Shirou. Ector spoke with patience. "If you wish to become the king and defeat Vortigern the usurper, you cannot do it alone. You must recruit him." As a loyal knight of King Uther, his allegiance was unquestionable. It was Uther himself who had entrusted Artoria to his care. Ector was well aware of the mission that Artoria was undertaking and was determined to help her defeat Vortigern and unify Britain. But now, he found himself standing before a great sage, and he hadn't even known it. Furthermore, why had he not signed a master-servant agreement with Shirou upon finding him? As a result, Shirou was now a free man, able to leave or stay as he pleased. Hector was all but certain that this person was the key to unifying Britain, and thus reiterated, "You must recruit him, Artoria. He is an indispensable force for you." Artoria nodded solemnly. "I understand." In fact, she had already resolved to recruit Shirou without Hector's repeated reminders. She was serious, but not naive. If she had not realized the importance of Shirou's presence after being beaten and strung up by him in the dream, then she would not be worthy of being the vessel for the ideal king. Most importantly, Shirou's kingly demeanor in the dream had left a lasting impression on her. Upon his appearance, everyone rallied around him, drawn to his charisma and leadership, and their morale skyrocketed. In contrast, her own morale had been low, and she had felt isolated and despised. To make matters worse, the people had even rebelled against her and bound her as a surrender gift to Shirou. The stark contrast between the two made Artoria realize just how much she still had to learn before she could truly become a king. She couldn't help but feel a sense of inadequacy and a burning desire to improve. Most crucially, Shirou undeniably possessed the wisdom and qualities of an ideal king, and Artoria knew she needed to learn from him in earnest. She felt a deep yearning to gain his knowledge and experience, to improve herself and become a better ruler for her people. After discussing the matter among themselves, they all set their sights on Shirou. This made Shirou, who was still sound asleep, instinctively shudder. He shifted his body, muttered a few words, rolled over, covered himself with a blanket, and continued sleeping. But the chill that had come over him had yet to fade, and it lingered throughout the night. By morning, the chill had become apparent. Upon opening his door, Shirou found two servants standing on either side, waiting respectfully for him to emerge. He was confused and couldn't help but ask, "What are you guys doing?" Kay approached him with a creepy grin, his eyes gleaming with an intensity that made Shirou's skin crawl. "Kay, what's going on?" Shirou asked. Grinning widely, Kay replied, "You're our honored guest. This is how we treat our honored guests." "Honored guest, my ass?" Shirou shook his head and went to weed the hill, beginning his daily work. However, the others followed him like an entourage, staring at his back intently, making Shirou feel uneasy. He couldn't help but ask, "What are you trying to do, Kay?" Kay simply continued to grin without giving an answer. Shirou began to feel increasingly uneasy and crouched down to start weeding the garden, but before he could even begin, the others rushed over and took over the task for him. When he asked them what they were doing, they simply replied that he was their honored guest. At lunchtime, they served him an array of exquisite dishes, including several pieces of grilled meat. However, the most significant detail was that Artoria pushed half of her own food towards him and stared intently at him. Shirou hesitated, picking up the food only to set it back down again. He felt like he was under a microscope and couldn't bear the thought of being watched while he ate. To make matters worse, he had learned from experience that flattery often had an ulterior motive. Kay and Artoria remained silent, their unwavering gazes fixed on Shirou. Overcome with anxiety and fear, Shirou finally spoke up. "What's going on here? Can you please just act normal? You're really scaring me." Kay simply grinned in response, but Artoria spoke with a serious tone. "Guinevere, I implore you to become my knight and teach me the wisdom of being a king." Huh? What was going on? Kay's smile disappeared. How could her impulsive younger sister be making a recruitment offer so soon? They had planned to show Shirou their sincerity and the benefits of joining them before extending the offer. This sudden offer was not part of the plan. Wouldn't this ruin everything? "Oh, is that all?" Shirou breathed a sigh of relief. He had been afraid that he was being followed by people with questionable intentions, but it seemed he was mistaken. She asked eagerly, "Have you accepted my offer, Guinevere?" Shirou shook his head firmly. "I'm sorry, but I don't want to become anyone's knight," he replied. "And as for the wisdom of a king, I have no idea what that even means. I'm just an ordinary person who's always been led by others." All he wanted was to go back home to his family. He had no interest in the life of a knight, and he certainly didn't possess the wisdom of a king. In his dream, he defeated both Merlin and Artoria effortlessly. But that was only because the dream world was vastly different from reality and resembled a paradise. In the real world, there were issues like land salinization and conflicts that arose from the implementation of the laws, which would inevitably clash with the interests of the nobles and lead to further disputes. Moreover, the decree from the previous game, which offered generous treatment to surrendering enemies, was only possible due to the development of productive forces, but it would still create new problems and contradictions. In reality, defeating opponents as easily as in his dreams was impossible. If they had no food and were forced to continue fighting, they would likely collapse even faster. The soldiers might even rebel before the peasant uprising began. Without a clear vision for the future, a rebellion was almost inevitable. "Don't underestimate yourself, Guinevere," Artoria exclaimed with excitement. She believed that Shirou was undervaluing himself. Having experienced the gap between her own wisdom and that of Shirou's, she felt that it represented the true nature of an ideal king. The true nature of a king was to provide a good life for the common people and wield the power to command. This was the path that Artoria was determined to follow, the path of an ideal king. As the vessel for Uther's ideal king plan, Artoria had been educated by Hector and Merlin to become the perfect ruler. Before the kingdom simulation, she had no clear concept of what an ideal king should be. However, after seeing the way that Shirou was celebrated and loved by the people, while she was hated and offered to him like a prisoner, she had a newfound understanding of what an ideal king should be. Having gained a deeper understanding of what it truly meant to be a king, Artoria believed that being loved by the people was the ultimate ideal. She now saw everything she had learned about ruling as false. With this newfound perspective, she made a serious request of Shirou. "Please become my knight." As Shirou met the intense gazes of Artoria and Kay, who looked at him as if he were some great sage, he began to regret his decision to plant that field.